So we're talking about the really essential stuff today, the fundamentals of sound. If we get these things out of the way, we start to understand the basics about what sound really is. Then we can take that a step further and talk about, well, how do we manipulate it? How do we capture it? How do we amplify it? So let's start with the fundamentals of sound. What is sound? It's the reception of acoustic waves and their perception by the brain. What we're really talking about here is a real-world thing that happens in the natural world that causes a vibration of some kind. That vibration vibrates through some other medium and then reaches our ears and is interpreted by our eardrums and the mechanisms of our body and all that, and our brain makes sense out of it, yeah. So sound is the perception that we're bringing, but also it's the real-world vibration that occurs when two things collide, right? So that process is known as compression and rarefaction. Let's think about it like a big old like church bell or something, and you ring it, or maybe like a gong. You smack it and you ring it, it vibrates, right? The air around it is going to compress, push together the molecules of air, and then rarefaction is when they pull back apart. And that's going to continue to happen, that process, until the vibration completely dies away. And you can imagine as the vibrations lessen, the intensity of the sound is going to go down. Our perception of that sound is going to decrease as well. So compression and rarefaction is what's happening to that medium that the sound is traveling through as the vibration continues. Velocity is what we think of as the speed of sound. Right? You ever been to potentially like an outdoor concert or something, been really far away in the lawn seats and been seeing something that happens on stage, or maybe on the big screens that are there showing the drummer or something, and you see something before you actually hear the sound? That's because the speed of sound is slower than the speed of light, right? The speed of sound is also affected by the delivery medium, the thing that the sound is traveling through, and its temperature. Right? So sound travels through air faster than it travels through water, for example. Right? And based on the temperature of whatever the medium is, then sound is going to move faster as well. So there's a combination of different things that are going to affect how sound moves. Amplitude is what we can think of as a description of volume. Right, the loudness of something. We measure it in decibels. You'll hear this dB referred to a lot. You want to lower something a certain decibel level or raise the vocals certain decibel level. dB is sort of synonymous with that. And 115 decibels is actually the threshold of pain. So if you're anywhere at like a loud concert or something like that, if the sound that you're hearing exceeds 115 decibels, that's when you're actually starting to do damage to your ears. And if you're going to be a media production person, I always give this advice. You've got to make sure that you protect your ears. So if you're going to concerts, put something, block out the sound a little bit, right? Protect yourself, because that's how you're going to potentially make money. So amplitude is a fancy word for volume and the intensity level of a sound. Frequency is the number of times a sound wave completes a cycle in 1 second. So if you think back to when we talked about, well, sound is created by a vibration, right? And this compression and rarefaction process that happens. So that's creating a sound wave that cycles through that compression and rarefaction. The number of times that sound wave completes its cycle in 1 second is going to determine the frequency of a sound. And the higher the frequency, the higher the tone of the sound. Okay, so let's think about the example that I talked about earlier of the bell. Okay, you've got a big church bell on one side, and you've got a teeny little dinner bell that a butler might ring or something on the other side. All right, the church bell is going to have a much lower frequency. So the sound wave completes its cycle less times in 1 second than the dinner bell that the butler would use, because it's a much higher pitch. It has a much higher frequency, right? It's completing that sound wave cycle many more times in 1 second. Okay, so if we understand the basics of frequency, we can explore that just a little bit further, just to the tip of the iceberg. We measure frequency in a measurement called hertz, and there's a spectrum of frequency that the human that humans can hear. It's 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. That is the spectrum of human hearing frequency range. All right, anything below 20 hertz is what's known as infrasonic, and above 20 kilohertz is ultrasonic. Think of something like a dog whistle or something. You blow on a dog whistle, then humans can't hear that ultrasonic sound, but dogs, of course, can. They have a different spectrum of hearing range. We also connect frequency with pitch. There's a concept known as what's called a fundamental frequency. So every single sound actually contains a range of frequencies, but it has one fundamental frequency that would be most associated with the pitch of that sound. Then there's what's called harmonics, which are different frequencies much higher in that spectrum that particular sound might contain pieces of, right? But there's a fundamental frequency that is associated with pitch. So the higher the frequency, the higher the fundamental pitch, right? Those harmonic sounds make up what's called the timbre of a sound, right? So frequency determines pitch, but those harmonic frequencies, those little ones that are much above, further above in the spectrum of the fundamental frequencies, those are going to shape and color the sound in what's called timbre. That's the reason why a clarinet and a saxophone both playing a G sharp will sound different still, even though they're playing the same exact pitch. They have a different timbre. Dynamic range is a very important part of sound. It's going to come back and we'll deal with it again and again, especially in audio processing. But dynamic range is the difference between the loud and soft parts of a sound. Now that can be an individual sound or it can be a group of sounds. It could be the dynamic range of a school bell is very minimal because it's just loud, right? But the dynamic range of, say, an orchestral performance might be very wide dynamic range because at one moment you might have a single flute player playing a solo or something like that, and it's very quiet and very emotional or something. And then you might have 90 people in the full orchestra playing something at maximum volume, at which point things are going to be very loud. But the dynamic range is the difference between that soft and the loud part. So that's a really important thing to know because if we understand dynamic range, then we can control it and we can improve our sounds or we can clean up different sounds. So dynamic range is an important part of sound that's going to come back again and again. So there we go, the fundamentals of sound, everything that you should know to lay a foundation for some of the other things that we're going to talk about in regards to recorded audio.